Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Good evening, Simon. And another show. Gotta love the title of today. Voi Racers. You deserve credit for that one.
I would if I was the one that invented it.
Oh, you stole it.
I did steal it. I've either stolen it directly or extrapolated it from the conversation that took place during the council chamber. You will hear ever a man for his puns, Councillor Lee Hunt referring to whipping Voi's. And so that's where, but I think, yeah, I think it does get mentioned later on. So, yes, I would take the credit if it was mine. It isn't, so I won't. I'm not that kind of person.
Yeah, excellent. But what we have got is we've gone even further on the digital age, haven't we? We are now website-tastic.
Yeah, it's almost like we've entered 1990. So yeah, forgive the probably rather lame design to anyone who knows what they're doing. I didn't. So, but yeah, we do now indeed have a website, which is PP, as in the letters PB. So pppodcast.uk. So by all means, do go have a butchers at our website. But don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe us wherever you're watching us. If you're watching us from the live stream or the recorded show in YouTube, please do click the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner. And if you're watching us on Facebook, please do like and follow the page, just so you can make sure you're kept up to date with what's going on. But if you want to hear more about us, then you can even sign up for an email, which is something else that we're trying to do. So
Yeah, we've gone for a mailing list as well now. So I think merchandise will come next. That's got to be our
we need Pompey Politics Podcast mugs.
Well, some say that's you and me, mate. But yeah, but that would be very harsh.
That's true. Although unfortunately, we won't be able to provide them free to our guests like some shows do. We just quite simply don't have the budget for that, old man.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think I think the Portsmouth Independent Party have their own line in mugs. I notice there's never been a couple coming our way, so yeah, we might have to have a little chat with George. But aside from our self-referential moments there, obviously we had George on last week, who gave us an excellent insight into the work of the Portsmouth Independents and their motions that were going to full council. And I guess the big news was around the desire of the Portsmouth Independents to kill off the Voi trial, and took fairly sternly against the whole e-scooter trial.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, their motion called for the council to kill the trial entirely. I mean, the trial, as we talked about last week, has been going for about 18 months, 2 years. It's part of a government-led trial to understand what the requirements would be for e-scooters and how to legislate in order to make them safe. So it does make I guess that makes Portsmouth guinea pigs of a sort, or electrically powered guinea pigs.
Yeah, there's something more sinister about that than I care to think about. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because and I think it speaks to the heart of the discussion, which is that Portsmouth is almost the ideal city for the trial because we are so densely populated, and it is difficult to separate active travel and cars. But then I guess the flip side to that is obviously the more you mix e-scooters and motor vehicles, or e-scooters and pedestrians, because of the densely packed nature of Portsmouth, the more of a challenge that becomes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You would think that somewhere flat, somewhere quite dense. We're not saying the population are dense, we're saying we're densely populated. Somewhere like that would be a great place to do it. And indeed, they're certainly popular amongst the people that use them. I think the $64 million question is, how popular are they amongst the people that don't?
And this is, I think, where we get to the heart of the discussion, which is that, and I think it's touched on in the debate, which you've got some excellent clips for, about the fact that some people, the people that use them, like them, and the people that don't like them. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting. We shall weave our way through it. And I think you've got a couple of clips from our Portsmouth Independent chums that kind of frame their thinking just to get us started.
Let's listen to their kind of opening of it. So the motion was proposed by Councillor George Madrick and by Councillor Russell Simpson. So let's listen into kind of some clips of their. This isn't the arguments in full, but this is the clips of their opening on Tuesday's full council. He says as he clicks the button ferociously.
Unfortunately, a teenager in my ward passed away whilst being on an e-scooter. And obviously that really highlighted my attention to e-scooters and to learn more about it. I think the facts are clear. The people think that this is a negative scheme. It's not as environmentally friendly as it's led to believe. I'm not necessarily against e-scooters in full, but road infrastructure isn't suitable, training isn't suitable, and in my opinion, currently they don't, and they're not fit for purpose. I'm not necessarily against e-scooters. I just feel that there's many parts which doesn't support it. In my opinion, we have enough safe cycle lanes. Talking about having lanes for scooters to get a general feel of how they feel having new scooters, and a massive 80% were not in favour of the e-scooters. Even one young teenager said to me his young sister was nearly knocked by an e-scooter that was on the pavement. I spoke to one of the Hillsey Line Rangers whose arm was in a bandage. He told me he was not a scooter. It was on the pavement along Copper Road turning into Jerome Road. Even I did encounter a near-miss scooter cyclist riding into the new road layout at Rudmore roundabout. You know, these scooters aren't insured, and I know that's always the debate with cyclists, but you know, when you're knocking people down and injuring them, a lot of emails with videos and photos of many scooters on pavements, obviously without helmets as well, but also in some cases I've seen adults with children on the mounting 2-on-1. It's no concern that we push this through without really looking at the whole scheme. Also maybe considering the difference between the infrastructure layout between the south of Portsmouth and the north of Portsmouth. Call upon Councillor Lee Hunt.
Pause that there. I thought we'll through that before we get on to Councillor Lee Hunt.
Yes, and very interesting there in terms of the kind of framing of the discussion. You know, Councillor Madrick at the start there said, you know, he's not against e-scooters in principle, and I think it's important for us to be very clear. I think about the fact that we've got two camps, haven't we? We've got two different flavours of e-scooter. And the motion seeks to end the Voi trial. Now, the Voi trial is, it's government sort of sponsored or led, or however you want to describe it. Now, interestingly, the Voi scooters are insured, and a lot of the issues that Councillor Madrick and Councillor Simpson were talking about were the issues caused by the people who are riding e-scooters in an illegal fashion. Because, just to be very clear, the Voi scooter, I believe, can be ridden on the road, can't be ridden on the pavement, and a privately owned e-scooter can't actually be ridden anywhere on either the public footpath or the public highway. So again, if you're seeing two people on an e-scooter, or a child on an e-scooter, or an e-scooter bombing along the pavement, they're all people who are, whether they're private hire, whether they're privately owned, or the Voi scooters, they're not being ridden in compliance with the law.
No, and I think that's I mean that's a key distinction to understand. I guess from a visibility perspective, people with how e-scooters are being ridden or used, sure there'll be people that are unhappy with them outright and just want them to be stopped and banned entirely, to kind of, if you like, to put them back in the box, quite literally, and send them back to Amazon or Halfords or other retailers are available. That's the thing, and the council has come to this in a moment. Is kind of the question of, but this motion doesn't seek to do that. It just seeks to stop the council-led scheme, the Voi scooters, rather than do anything about the privately owned ones, which, let's be honest, are the vast majority.
Yes, and I think it is that there is almost a slight absurdity, isn't there, in terms of, we've got an electric, we've had electric vehicles before, and again, I cast my mind back to, I'm guessing it was the early 90s and the Sinclair C5. I don't know whether do you remember the device?
I do. That thing that had a washing machine engine in it,
Yes.
and was very, very low to the ground, so needed specialist flags put on the top of it to stop lorry drivers basically just pancaking you off the road, well, into the tarmac. So as so often, to be fair, with Sir Clive Sinclair, he came up with ideas first, but someone else implemented them better later on.
Well, indeed, and so that the dilemma's been about for a while, and I think as we look into this, it's going to be very interesting to see which way this discussion goes, because there is almost an element of, it feels a little bit like this motion might risk throwing the baby out and keeping the bathwater. The Voi scooters do have at least an element of control, whereas the unlicensed and the illegal scooters have no control at all. So shall we see whether, I'm sure Lee Hunter's got something robust to say on the whole arrangement, particularly if he was the person who came up with the Voi Racer pun.
Well, let's just see how that whether that turns out to be a clear prediction. Here we go with Councillor Lee Hunt.
The councillor, and what he talked about was mostly the unregulated, uninsured vehicles that go whizzing about. The lawful, regulated scheme is being used as a whipping Voi.
There we go.
Heaped upon it all the annoyance with the e-scooters generally. We can chuck the Voi scheme out if everybody wants. It won't change a damn thing.
And now Councillor Vernon Jackson.
It's not the scooters that are dangerous, it's the people who ride them. Let's be frank, there are some motorists who drive dangerously. There are also some cyclists who ride dangerously. There are even some pedestrians who walk dangerously into the middle of the road. But the effect on this, if we pass this motion today, is that we would remove the legal electric cycles with lights on, indicators, and with reg numbers, and it would leave the illegal ones completely untouched. And I think they're really dangerous. I was going down Fratton Road with an illegal scooter beside me, 8 o'clock at night, 2 kids on it, no lights, nothing. Enormously dangerous. But this motion does not interested in that. I think the issue here is a lack of police enforcement. Understanding is in Cambridgeshire, in Bedfordshire, in North Yorkshire, and in Bristol, the police have got a programme of confiscating the illegal ones. And in some places, they almost disappeared. The question we have, luckily the Assistant Police Commissioner is here to answer, is why are in Hampshire the police not doing that? Because it's illegal ones that I think cause the most problem. And my disappointment with this motion is he doesn't mention them.
I now call Councillor Heaney.
I've changed my mind. I think the scooters have been an important way of changing the way we move around the city and have been a valuable thing for many people. And unfortunately, the implementation of the trial has almost given a green light for people who think now, despite the law, despite what people are told, that it is perfectly okay to take privately bought e-scooters onto the road and ride them around like anybody else. And I have to say, I think retailers do have some responsibility here, because I've been to Halfords and gone and had a look, and they have a line saying they're not used on the road, but they still sell them. Now, in what other circumstance would we allow some sort of implement vehicle to be sold for use when it was illegal on the highway? The government have already indicated that they are likely to legislate to allow for scooters. They've already given a fairly strong indication they want to create a new category of vehicles that will be allowed. In a sense, I think this motion really misses an important point, or an important trick, really, because what we should be doing is having a motion which sets down some clear standards that we would like to see if these things are eventually brought into being as legal vehicles. We deal with insurance issues. Who deals with the insurance issues? The age limit for them, for example. But I think this motion would have been a real opportunity to do that, and I think it misses the point. I think Councillor Vernon Jackson is also right, is if we were to stop the trial tomorrow, it wouldn't stop e-scooters riding around the city of them. And Councillor Hunt raised a very important point, is that the police are not enforcing the law here in Portsmouth. I'm not quite clear why, because they do it elsewhere. I recognise that the use of e-scooters is not the most serious crime issue that the police have to deal with. I fully recognise that. But a bit of high-profile activity around that certainly send the message, going to the schools, the secondary schools, and giving the message out to kids that actually you shouldn't be riding these. I happened to pick up on the news, actually, from the 24th of April 2022, and they were reporting that there had been 8 pedestrian fatalities and accidents in Portsmouth between June 2021 and April 2022. That is a serious matter. Clearly, the Voi scooters and the e-scooters are not at that level. So I think the idea that we should ban things because of accidents, we'd be banning cars if we did that. Because if you look at the accidents on cars, they're much, much more serious. But we don't ban cars because we recognise that we have to try and do other things. There is no real purpose to ending the trial, because it will not solve the problem that people are trying to address.
Councillor Weems.
There are a lot of people using them terribly. I've seen it. I think everyone has. But there are a lot of people who use them well. Instead of just saying no, I would put forward a few measures and ways that we could actually make it better before we just turn around and get rid of the scheme. When I went to Budapest for my birthday in February, they have the scheme there, and they do several things that I don't know if we do it, but we possibly do. They have a speed limiter on the app where you can't go over a certain speed until you've kind of proven your track record of being safe. In Budapest, they use a tracking system as well, where if you, let's say, you whiz by and you're doing something stupid, all you have to do is just take a quick picture. Most people have the app in there, and you just quickly put the reg in, and then it stops that person from using the e-scooter over a certain period of time. That could be something Voi could. In a lot of other safety measures that are definitely something that could be put forward. I've had several residents email me and say they think the scheme's brilliant. They use it to get to work. They use it. There's a nurse who I know, I won't name her, but she uses the e-scooter to go to QA because to pay for parking. I just think if we can get the education right, have that track record of actually trying to implement measures, then we'll get somewhere. And then
Councillor Stagg.
Okay, so I'm just here from Councillor Stagg. I'll just pause it there for a second. So, yeah, so there's an argument that Councillor Weems is making there about, rather than outright bans, let's regulate and manage the existing scheme that we have.
And I think there's a couple of really interesting points. One of the things I was a bit stunned by is Councillor Vernon Jackson channeling the National Rifle Association. The guns don't kill people, people do. With the scooters don't injure people, it's the riders. I thought that was a strange turn of events from Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Yeah, Councillor Madrick picked up on that later on.
Does he? So
the Trumpian thing to say in that sort of respect. But broadly, the argument kind of seems to be, but we know there are people that use them well. We know there are people that use them badly, but there are people that use cars, cycles, skateboards well, and there are those that are complete idiots. And we have we have legislation and we have regulation that deals with poor manufacture or substandard manufacture. We have education and training that deals with responsible car use, and we have insurance mechanisms for
Yeah,
car use. So, in that respect, are we holding e-scooters to a different standard?
and I think that's key. I mean, Councillor Heaney, I can't believe he's a Labour councillor, because he always seems to talk with such good sense, and it always seems balanced. And I find myself listening to him and agreeing, which is always a worry for me. But anyway, I think that he makes a really great point. You know, the fact that major high street retailers sell these scooters with their sort of little badge that says, "Oh, by the way, not to be ridden anywhere," with a nod and a wink. You kind of think, well, oh, really? You know, I do struggle with that. And you know, again, it's that element of uh, and the enforcement piece. That bit I really don't understand, because I get that they're not. You know, I don't want police officers having to pursue them and do all that kind of nonsense. But it you know, the practice already exists. If you're driving your car uninsured and the police stop you, then the police will send for a recovery vehicle that will take your car away. And for you to recover your car, you have to turn up with the appropriate insurance documents. And then you have to go to the car pound and you have to pay a sum of money, and it's not inconsiderable, and you get your car back. So there's an element of, well, you're not insured to ride that electric scooter on the road. So, you know, the police, it doesn't seem difficult for me for the police then to seize that as an uninsured vehicle. And all right, because you can't ride it on the road, you can't turn up with insurance. But if the cost of recovering it was placed at a similar kind of level to the cost of recovering your car, you know, 250, £300, then I bet a lot of the illegal scooters wouldn't get recovered and they would be off the roads.
They would. I mean, whether people would just go buy another one, I don't know. There'll be a point where. So I don't disagree. I think there's an element of you need some sort of enforcement action. I don't know why. It's almost weird. I feel like I'm writing a Daily Mail headline
Well,
where
yes,
it's instead of we want the police to, you know, instead of those kind of like instead of going after the tofu eating, Guardian reading, wokerati, etc., then they should go after the menace of the pavements, the silent killers that are the e-scooter terrorists, or something like that is what the
yeah,
Daily Mail would probably write.
yeah,
How am I doing?
you're getting there. You're getting there. But I think there's an element of we've heard from three contributors now, and all seem to be sort of broadly agreeing. And I think, you know, the point that Dan Weems makes, which for me is, you know, it is about a slightly cleverer method of enforcement, isn't it? It's the fact that, you know, at the moment, as I understand it, you rock up, you scan your credit card, you know, or your debit card, you say, yes, I've got a license or something similar. And then effectively you can take the scooter and hand it on to one of your children or your mate or anybody who isn't appropriate to ride it, and they can go heading off into the distance. You know, the screen that Dan described, which is, you know, you link it through the app knows that it's you on it. You know, for me, it's just a tighter level of control. We seem to have the ability to control the Voi, but not we've got the ability, but not the will to control the illegal scooters.
No, and there's a supply. You know, as we said, as Councillor Heaney has said, there's a supply issue of most. Let's be really honest. None of these people own a country park estate where they can bomb up and down them on private roads. I mean, I know there are estates that aren't adopted roads in the city. So, bearing in mind, I live on one of them. I don't want it to become a racetrack for e-scooter users. Thank you very much, please, the people of Cosham. Yeah, why is it? It's almost like Boots suddenly being able to sell cannabis, but you can't actually use it, but we can still sell it. I mean, you could even argue actually that car dealerships selling Ferraris that can do like 150 miles an hour, when, let's be honest, most of the people that buy a Ferrari aren't going to be using them on a racetrack to be able to go to those sorts of speeds. So, again, is the proportionate and, I know, liberal way to deal with this to actually legislate for it properly, but that is the purpose of the trial, which is to collect the data for the government to be able to make an informed decision, which I know would be a strange thing for them, to make an informed decision about it. I thought I'd get that in because I was surprised that that you came off the fence so much about obviously Councillor Heaney being a Labour councillor. I thought we'll at least have that. But it's we need to move forward. There's no realistic route to them being uninvented.
No, and I think this is this actually kind of speaks to the heart of some of the transport issues that there are within the city, and we've touched on it on this podcast before, and I'm bloody sure we'll touch on it again. We have got an island that is too full, and it's too full of cars, and ultimately the only way to make it less full of cars is to get people onto alternative modes of transport. And, again, I think that's where these things, having now existed, they're not going to unexist.
It's almost like you're channeling Councillor Lynn Stagg there.
Well, let's hear from Lynn. So if Lynn Stagg and I are aligned, then good Lord.
I know you should probably sit down.
We live in strange times.
Just before we do that, just to clarify, to rent a Voi e-scooter, you do need to be 18 years or older, and you do need to have at least a provisional driving license, which must be scanned through the app when the rider rents their first scooter. So how people that quite clearly aren't, because I've seen people using them that quite obviously aren't 18 or more, sometimes 2 at a time. How they're managing to do it, one doesn't know. Are parents taking a snapshot of their driving license and allowing the children to update that as an image and upload that to the app? I don't know. I don't feel it's probably a good idea for me to basically stand in front of someone bombing down the street, some 2 14-year-olds on a Voi scooter bombing down the street, and ask them how they've rented it. I can predict what the response is going to be. But let's listen to Councillor Stagg.
Now, 35% of all car journeys in Portsmouth are for less than 3 miles. So if you can get people to use an alternative transport instead of their car, that would help contribute to cleaning up the atmosphere and helping with climate change to fight against it. If we are to succeed in persuading residents to use their cars less, there needs to be a variety, and I stress the word variety, of different travel options available. When people think about e-scooters, they're not going to go away. But unfortunately, and this is where the crunch comes, they don't fit into any existing transport category so that they can be regulated. That is why the government introduced trial schemes so that they can learn from all the participating trial areas what are the problems and what needs to be put in place to ensure that e-scooters, their riders and the public are safe. Put in a few things here. There are no reports of anybody being knocked down by a Voi scooter. That doesn't mean to say it hasn't happened, but nothing has been reported to Voi or to me. So we need to look at a number of factors. The manufacture of e-scooters, the standards of the materials and their construction, the headlights, they all need to have headlights, taillights, indicators, limited maximum speed, etc. Scooters have a limited maximum speed of 12.5 miles per hour, Councillor Weems. Over that, the motor's cut out. They also have a GPS system. It's not as accurate as we would like. Theoretically, we would like them to cut out when if people go onto the pavements, but it's not that fine, unfortunately. But the Voi scooters do have all other things. You need to have insurance for the riders. Now, all the Voi scooter riders are insured. We need riders to have either a driving license or a riding license or whatever a license is applicable to riding e-scooters in order to be able to ride one. We need training for all riders and certificate to prove it's being done. We need enforcement by the police. And to echo Councillor Hunter said, we're not blaming the police as such, but again, it's the lack of money. There aren't enough police officers to do everything that's required of them at all. So by removing the trial eaters would leave the privately owned and unregulated e-scooters still on our roads and pavements with no control or enforcement, so it would be counterproductive and completely illogical. Councillor Madrick has used, as lots of people do, statistics for his own purpose. I should for my purpose as well. And these are factual, okay? According to the survey data, this is what people have fed back to us, but 220,000 car journeys have so far been saved by Voi e-scooter use. That's a hell of a lot of journeys. That equates to nearly 120 tonnes of CO2 greenhouse gas and 18 kilograms of PM 2.5 particulates. The Port trial has the highest rate of car replacement in the whole country. Well, that's with the Voi scooters. We need to remember that of the users of the Voi scooters who took the survey, 78% have been positive in their feedback and have been mainly younger users, whereas 75% of non-users are against them. The majority are older. So this puts people into two separate categories. The younger ones who've actually used them, the older who haven't. So the older ones who haven't are critical, the younger ones who've used them are in favour. 82% of people who've used the scooters think they shouldn't be banned, compared with 65% of older people who haven't used them. There's also evidence that the majority of those who are against them confuse the illegally ridden, privately owned scooters with legal Voi trial scooters. Now, you don't need to actually be able to catch the number, the registration number on the scooter. I'll just give this one point. You can phone them, and the number is, and I'll have this on somewhere, 0800 376 8179. Tell them where you saw the person doing whatever they shouldn't be doing and at what time, and they can trace them from the app. If they're caught, first offence is a 7-day ban, and second offence is a 3-day ban. Third offence is a life ban, and if they don't replace the scooters in the docking racks, they get a £25 fine. So
Councillor Peter Harris. I mean, every survey, 3/4 of those are people that don't use it. It's much easier to get people to go out and vote against something than it is to go out and get them to vote for something. It has had a negative effect on people. That's within the data. People are actually using a scooter rather than walking. That's a problem. I think if we're trying to get people out, breathing good fresh air, we need to really deal with that. The biggest issue with this trial that I find is we have gone through the trial without making any amendments, any real significant changes. Well, what we've done is we've added more docking stations, we've added more scooters without looking at the problems that are raised in each wave. So wave 2's had problems, wave 3's had problems, and wave 4's had problems. We haven't actually changed anything.
Councillor.
If there are children that clearly don't have driving licences riding these scooters, then that is a criminal offence. That's no different to giving my driving licence to Councillor Sanders and say, off you go and drive a car with my driving licence. The motion, had it come forward and suggested, let's send this to the Tax Committee to look at properly, which Councillor Simpson, I'll just wrap up, Lord Mayor, which Councillor Simpson could well have done because he's a member of that committee, so he could have asked it, then I think that would have been a better route to have gone, had the motion said that.
I now call on Councillor Sanders.
And personally, I think if Councillor Madry and Councillor Simpson had either done as Councillor Bosch has suggested, or replace the word terminate with review, this frankly would be over in 2 minutes, because I think we would all probably vote for it because we all want to see improvement on streets. People will believe that this will guarantee to get rid of all these e-scooters overnight. Now, if anyone can guarantee me that in this chamber, please yell now. But no one can. And that's the...
We now come to Councillor Steve Pitt.
I just wanted to point something out, and that is that it's not to say that the police have not enforced on illegal e-scooters in Portsmouth. They did actually do it once on the 18th of March this year as part of a 3-day operation that was run between Southampton, the Isle of Wight and Portsmouth. Well, they did speak 14 riders that day. Now, we've already heard, of course, that if you're caught on a Voi e-scooter inappropriately, not riding it in an appropriate manner, riding it where you should be, having a pillion on board, not with the correct insurance, then you get an immediate 7-day ban. And then, as Councillor Stagg recorded for us earlier, there are penalties that escalate from there to a complete ban, never able to use them again. So isn't it really interesting that when the police did this 1 day of activity around this particular issue, they didn't actually ban anybody, they didn't seize a single e-scooter, and they didn't issue any fines? And I agree with Councillor Bosher. It's criminal activity here to be buying an unauthorised motor vehicle that is not within the existing youth class and to on a public highway. That's what you said, Councillor Bosher, and I agree with you. So if that's the case, are we to assume that if the police want, suddenly catch people doing other illegal, they also give them a letter, or will we expect law to be properly applied? Let's encourage the government to shorten this trial period and get some proper legislation on the books which will keep everyone in this chamber happy, but let's all make sure that the police are not just issues when people are indulging in criminal activity.
I now call upon Professor Councillor George Madrick to sum up, and then a vote will be taken.
A couple of councillors stated that if there was an amendment or a probably voted it through, if the single word from terminate was changed to review, it would have passed. Well, why has no party or member here put a through? Seems a bit strange. I've also heard a lot of councillors talk about how dangerous the scooters are, and referencing Voi in relation to that. I mean, our own leader stated that I think e-scooters are dangerous for the people of Portsmouth, but then sits there and says he's going to oppose it. I'm just a bit confused. I'm trying to get my head around how councillors can stand here and say we know they're unsafe, but we're going to oppose this motion. Our job is to send that message, and we're not. We failed at that clearly, and we're essentially encouraging, in my opinion, illegal scooters to be driven by approving legal scooters to be driven, if you understand what I mean. Councillor Stagg, obviously you've stated a few points. One of the things that really confused me, and I noticed a few members, Councillor Goslin, one of them looked at me in complete shock when you said that you aren't aware of anyone being knocked down by a Voi scooter. One of your own officers got knocked down 2 weeks ago. Why do you not know this? They're injured. They've got a cast around their wrist. I'm not sure how you don't know this. Equally, your own report on section 5.15 states that there have been 200 injuries and accidents reported to Voi, which in the report, your report quotes that there has been serious injury and hospitalisations.
Councillor Sanders.
My reading, standing orders and the constitutional approach, is that would have negated the motion.
Oh, I think I've lost the stream net, but
I think that's where that's where
so what Councillor Sanders was explaining was the reason why no one put any amendment in is because quite sensibly there's a standing order. So these are a lot of the rules of operation, if you like, of council meetings. So the standing orders say that you can't put an amendment to a motion that negates the purpose of the motion. If you're for example, if the motion was we want the council to write a letter to the government to tell them to stop it raining, you can't then put an amendment that says we don't want the council to write to the government to tell them to stop it raining, because that's kind of taking away the point of the motion. And the fact that the original motion doesn't say review, doesn't say let's have another look at this, let's go through the data again, let's kind of see what's happening, let's learn from what we've seen so far in the trial. It just says I want it to stop.
Yes, and again, I think there is an element of, I thought Councillor Stagg spoke very eloquently about the fact that that there are these two camps, those that don't like and those that do. There's a sort of generational gap there, and I think this probably speaks to the wider, it speaks to the wider conversation around the fact that transport is going to have to change, and there is there people who use even their own private transport. I think it's 2035, might even be 2030, where there will be no more petrol or diesel cars sold. So I think there is this period of adjustment, and it's almost, there's a little bit with the electric scooters that almost standing against them feels like kind of a little bit kind of hoping the tide won't come in.
I just can't help it but kind of think that it's almost like if you kind of can't. I mean, neither of us were around, but if you think at the turn of the last century when the motor car was invented and becoming prevalent, the legislation that we have about construction of roads, construction of motor vehicles, the training and certification that you need to have, and the insurance, etc., that you need to have in order to own and drive a motor car on the public road, didn't exist.
Yep. Yeah.
And I mean, in fact, in the very beginning, someone had to walk like 5 paces in front with a red flag to warn people that there was a motor car coming, which obviously is absolutely ridiculous, and it isn't something we'd replicate now. But it just goes to show that legislation very often, and you see this in legislation to do with issues regarding internet safety, for example, or about consumer protection, legislation moves at a much slower pace than the pace of invention. And actually some societal change that takes place because of technological advancements that mean that there aren't necessarily at the outset protections in place. So it's a shame, because I think that there's definitely a conversation to be had about how can we make them safe or safer for everybody. That's not just the people that use them, but the people that share public spaces with them. But I don't think this one kind of does that. This one tries to kind of, and also I think that the point that Councillor Stagg made about older people don't really use them, so therefore they're against them. It's not because they're older; it's because they're not in the probably the youth the youth demographic of people that would be likely to use them, and it just happens to be separated roughly by age. But the for and against isn't because of the age per se; it's because it's the people that use them, so therefore see the benefit of them, versus the people that don't, because they only see them as a nuisance, as something that creeps up behind them, in the same way that they're probably actually quite unhappy with people that are cycling along without a bell and letting them know that they're bombing past them. It's the same sort of thing. That can be quite frightening if someone comes up behind. It's not something I need to tell you about. So I just kind of think of, look, regardless of what anybody thinks, that this genie isn't going back in this bottle.
No, and I think the other factor that we need to consider is, that age demographic. As somebody whose eldest son was desperate to drive, even driving a small, modest car. His first car was the insurance was over £2,000. Was over £2,000. Well, that is a significant sum of money for a younger person to find, just to put the car on the road. And so I think, again, as we're looking at this from that point of view of, when you start looking at the job demographics, you start looking at things such as, well, okay, how do you get to work in the morning? If you've got an early start or a late finish, you've got to find a way to get to and from work under your own steam, because owning a car is becoming particularly expensive. Is particularly expensive. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think there was a really good point made, I think, by Steve Pitt there, who, when he said, look, we need to bring, we kind of know what we know now. Let's move forward with, regulating these, and private ownership is going to become a thing, isn't it? So the sooner we move that into existence, and that coupled with the same levels of enforcement we'd expect from the police to people who ride motorcycles or drive cars irresponsibly, that feels much more like the solution than us taking a slightly, forgive me, George, a slightly Luddite approach and smashing the spinning jenny.
Okay. We'll see how that because yeah, you're right. That to me that seems like the more logical kind of way forward, and it is, as many of the councillors said, it is almost a shame that the motion directs its ire at the Voi scooters rather than the sector in general.
Yeah, because I get the impression if the motion would have been, this council calls upon the police to take a zero tolerance approach to unlicensed and illegal e-scooters, because they are, they're having an adverse effect on the safety of the people of Portsmouth and are colouring the perceptions of the legal and valid Voi scheme. I get the impression that one would have thundered through.
Yeah, I think it would have sailed through. I mean, this one, as it was, the motion was lost. There were 5 votes for, 26 against, and 6 abstentions. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
So I mean, I'm guessing the 3 against were our friends from the PIP. So it looks like not everybody followed party lines on this one. And
no, so the I don't think there was a recorded vote actually on it. So, but yeah, you can imagine it kind of going that way. But it's one to discuss, and there was a conversation to have. But considering that, and considering unfortunately the limitations of the wording of the amendment, it was still an hour 15 debate about actually how to manage this transition to a vehicle type that our laws and our roads are not prepared for. And that was the debate. So there we go.
And so the Pips didn't win out on that one. They had another one in play, did they not? In terms of, we touched last week on the roads of Paulsgrove.
Yes.
And
So
the fact that they perhaps weren't getting quite the attention that George very rightly felt they deserved.
yeah. So with regards to that one, it mentions specifically some roads in Paulsgrove that are actually of a concrete construction and have a tarmac topping that's deteriorated over time and therefore become kind of quite broken and uneven, and therefore difficult to drive on, and a concern to residents. So there's a point there, but the motion talks about basically the roads of Paulsgrove not really getting the same look in as other roads in the city, and that residents there are unhappy seeing near constant road improvements in the south of the city, when they don't seem to see kind of something similar in their neck of the woods. Councillor Stagg, who's the cabinet member for traffic and transportation, talked through some responses to explain that all of the roads in the city are on like a 4-year cycle of them being inspected by the contractor Colas, and essentially the official definition, by the way, of a pothole is something that's deeper than 40 millimeters, but their Colas's standards mean that they will treat with patching something that's at least 20 millimeters deep. And that councillors can be given that schedule. They don't get it at the moment. They do get advance notice of particular maintenance in the ward. So there was quite a conversation to and fro about, well, yeah, actually, wouldn't it be a good idea? This is what several different councillors were saying. Well, wouldn't it be a good idea if we knew when the roads are being inspected? Then we can meet the officers and discuss particular issues, or we can meet the representatives from CONAS and discuss those issues. So yeah, I mean, Councillor Heaney again will you'll be pleased to know made a sensible intervention on this one, saying that concentrating on what the motion actually asks for, which is basically councillors don't get information about when the surveys are being done and how they're being done, what the process is, and that would be helpful to have, because more transparency and clarity about that process would be helpful. He did mention that he's had he feels it's a positive step by the assurances that Councillor Stagg gave. So and then several other councillors kind of chipped in. Councillor Atkins chipped in about saying about roads elsewhere in the north of the city, and then Councillor Pitt referred to other roads in the south of the city that are similarly affected. But the issue with Chedworth Crescent is again, it's this concrete construction. But he spoke to there being 84 roads of a similar construction within the city, totaling 24.6 kilometres. And although it might not be desired by the residents, the concrete construction road is structurally safe. But years ago, someone made a decision that at the behest of the residents, they would put a tarmac topping over them so that there was a black surface to the concrete roads. Concrete roads obviously are also, I think, a bit noisier than tarmac roads. So that may well have been what drove resident decisions or requests at that point, rather than just it looks prettier if it's covered in tarmac. But it's not as simple as just scraping. If you scrape that tarmac off, you've got to then treat any cracks within the concrete. You've got to deal with where the concrete road meets the rest of the road networks. You've got to deal with kind of leveling that so that works. And his calculations were that to do that across the 84 roads in the city would cost about £4 million. And there are better things to spend public money on than basically scraping back a load of roads that are like that. And in the meantime, the COLAS contract is obviously up for review in about 7 years' time. So, and asking the cabinet to rewrite the contract on the fly, that people should be very, very careful about the can of worms that they're opening. So, yeah, there was quite a conversation there about how sensible the contract was, about how about I guess in hindsight, it's very easy to kind of pick that apart, but there was a bit of an exchange about that not being done very well. To be honest, some quite heavy accusations about that being not very well intended. And the Lord Mayor in the end actually asked that that particular part of the conversation was struck from the record because the officers' concerns that were being accused, although they weren't named in the chamber, could be identified, and therefore that needed to be withdrawn. But overall, again, it's not as simple as we just need to do something with this road. It's a particular construction type from a historic decision that means that that's what's causing the issue. So again, more in depth than probably the road surface.
Yeah, but I think it kind of, and again, the whole COLAS, there's a whole show in that in itself, isn't there? But I think there is an element, and I think you touched on it at the start. It's the transparency thing, isn't it? Again, you said that they can patch if it's only 2 centimeters deep rather than the 4. Well, from what George discussed with us last week. I guess the question that I would be asking if I was George, well, from what was described last week, this looks like the surface of the moon in terms of craters, and it hasn't been, if it's meant to be inspected every 4 years, when was it last inspected, or when is it going to be inspected next? Because you can see there are holes and craters everywhere. And I think, from that perspective, as you say, I think most residents are reasonable enough to know that, you're going to have to quote unquote wait your turn. I guess if you can't tell them when their turn is, that I think is when people start to feel abandoned. And I think there is very much a perception that the north of the city perhaps doesn't fare quite as well as the south in these matters. Now, that's allegedly moment, but so how did that one end up in the end? Did the Pips win that one?
Well, it kind of went backwards and forwards for a bit before Councillor Corkery pleaded for an outbreak of sense and moved a motion that it went basically to a vote. So the Lord Mayor called for a vote of the people that hadn't spoken yet to agree whether or not they moved to a vote, and they did move to a vote. And the motion there was also an amendment from the Conservative Party which spoke more broadly about wards in the north of the city rather than particularly just Paulsgrove. And that amendment was subsumed. So the subsumed motion passed with 23 votes in favour, with no one against, and with 16 abstentions. If you can guess.
Oh, I think I can work that out.
Oh.
Using my skill and cunning. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Lib Dems voted but abstained from the vote, and the Labour, Conservative, and PIP councillors all voted in favour of the motion.
Well, hopefully an outcome for the good people at the north of the city who are bumping through holes and trying to go about their business on their legally ridden Voi scooters.
Yeah, that's there is that too. The and again, it was a sparse full council. There were only 3 motions this time. So the third motion was from Ryan Brent, which was basically calling for a response from the council in March with regards to the investment in an anaerobic digester, which was something included in the as a line item in the budget last year, and the purpose of that was to be able to process the food waste that's collected across the city. Something Councillor Vernon Jackson was very proud that Portsmouth is one of only 2 councils in Hampshire that collect food waste. But Ryan Brent's figures said that basically we send 2 lorries a day, 50 miles each way, to Bournemouth for that collected food to be anaerobically digested, which means it's turned into produce. Basically, it produces fertilizer and methane, which is then fed into the national grid gas network. So it means that although that's a burning, obviously, of a gas, it's not directly been created as a result of mining fossil fuels or mining gas out of the ground. So in that respect, that's why that's a better thing. So yeah, so that one again, a bit of kind of to and fro with the conversation, but essentially Gerald Vernon Jackson, leader of the council, saying, yeah, but it's something that we need to come back to the council on. Simon Bosher remarking that it's been kicked around for 2 years. Maybe things would have moved on a little bit better if Councillor Pitt hadn't had a year's sabbatical. Well, it wasn't exactly something that Councillor Pitt chose to have. And he drew the parallel with the Tipner West scheme in that there's this thing happening that unless there's openness and engagement and discussion at the outset, then suspicion can set in, and residents and other councillors can be untrusting of what the actual plans are and what the council's desire and motivation is. So trying to keep these things confidential and fed back in a timely way can cause issues with the trust. And he did fairly say that cities administrations under all colours have been poor on consultation and engagement. So I think there was a broad agreement that yes, we will be coming back to the council. Gerald Vernon Jackson kept returning to the point that this is something that's going to come to full council anyway, because it's a decision for them to have. And although the particulars of the plan may well be commercially sensitive, it's probably better to discuss that in a confidential briefing to the group leaders than perhaps necessarily kind of like an open council meeting. But either way, again, it kind of just speaks to the let us know what's going on, let us feel that we're included, and then maybe things won't be so hard.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where, again, if you look at anything waste disposal related, and this I call this now, which is that everyone thinks it's a good idea until you decide where to build it, and then a lot of people will decide that it really wasn't a good idea, and it should be built somewhere else. So I think that's the next episode still to come, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I can sense from the differing parties an element of preemptive leaflet writing for the campaign for the May's local elections, and perhaps setting a timescale for something to report in March, just as the campaign kicks off. There's a bit of me, and call me, a cynical politico, but that's kind of the bit of me that kind of thinks that, well, this is what the parties are starting to line themselves up to do, to be able to accuse each other of not listening, of not engaging, of not being competent with money, of stopping money being spent on essential things, and all of those sorts of usual things that people will see and contribute to their recycling with in leaflets in May.
Absolutely. And speaking of things financial, looking ahead to next week, obviously Spreadsheet Phil is going to unveil the autumn statement, I think, on Wednesday, and we are hoping to put together a panel of good and learned folk of all colours next Sunday to, in advance, call what they're hoping for from the autumn statement. And then once Spreadsheet Phil has run the numbers, we will give that the full dissection next weekend.
Yes, I guess depending on your perspective, will it be the awful statement or the awesome statement?
Yeah, there'll be a macro or two in there of that. You can
There
be
will
sure.
be, but as someone once said, it's the economy, stupid.
Exactly. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. And don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, visit our website, all of those usual things, and say hi to Ian's cat.
And my cat has been Enid Blyton.
Yeah, there we go. A learned friend.